It's time for fun, learning, commentary, laughs, and more care of the most diverse group in the genealogy and family history world.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live. Welcome to BlackProGen Live with your hosts, Nika and True, and the baddest panel in these pedigree streets.
BlackProGen.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen Live.
Alito, chumachukma.
The unapologetic Black and people of color viewpoint.
Genealogy, family history research with flavor. Hey y'all, what is going on? We have reached season 6 of BlackProGen Live. It is 2020. How goes it, everybody in the genealogy sphere? It is Nika Smith here with the beginning of, well, a new beginning, right? With the 10s leaving and the 20s now on the horizon, a shift of focus is upon us. 2020 means the 6th season with the crew you love and the addition of new content to keep the people of color voice at the forefront of genealogy and family history. In this first episode of our Dawn of a New Decade series, learn the ins and outs of the 2 most utilized census sets for those researching African Americans within the United States. Thanks for joining us for The Count, a deep dive into the 1870 and 1880 U.S. Census. As always, be sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss a single thing regarding BlackProGen Live or otherwise. And be sure to follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and set your reminders so that you get notifications and you're never left out of any single thing. All right, we're going to jump in with the panel and come off mute, everybody. Say hello to all of our illustrious viewers who have been waiting more than a month to engage us about genealogy and family history. What is going on? Let's start with the left coast with Alex Traps Chavala. How are you?
Hey y'all, Happy New Year. We're ready for season 6. And shout out to Nika Smith for all that she did to keep the show going.
All right, we're gonna move a little bit further west, I think. I think it is west. With our other buddy in California, we've got 2 people joining us at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tonight. Felicia, what's going on?
2020, I'm getting old, but I'm happy to be here. I can't wait to learn more tonight and share everything with everybody.
Absolutely. Great. All right. Moving further, let's see. I think True, technically you're next. If we're moving down Highway 10 going east, we're sort of going in your direction. So you're next.
Yeah, I wanted to be last, but it's all good. Welcome back, everybody. It's 2020 and it's season 6. And I was not nervous tonight. It was like, oh, all right, we about to get it on again. So we're doing good here at Fort Knox, and I enjoyed my holidays, but I'm glad to see you all and be back with you all. So.
All right. Moving on. Let's see. We got to go clear over to the next coast to Ellen Fernandez-Sacco.
Hi, great to be here for season 6. Looking forward.
All right. And let's see, last but not least, the auntie among us, the lady in red. Hello, Miss Angela.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Coming to you from the East Coast, from the Chesapeake Bay, from the great state of Maryland, but I still maintain my Arkansas and Oklahoma roots. Happy New Year, everybody.
All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. It's the 7 of us here tonight to talk all things 1870 and 1880. Oh, did I forget James?
Oh. Did you? I don't know.
I didn't go up the coast. I'm so sorry. That's because there's more than one Y chromosome here with us tonight. So I got a little distracted. James, Aloysius, how are you?
Good evening, everybody. This is James R. Morgan III, coming to you from right outside the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. Although I'm born and raised in New Jersey, I got to get that straight because one of my co-panelists forgot that this evening. And I want to thank everybody for, again, supporting us. We're here at season 6, 2020. And we have a special guest tonight. Want to wish him happy birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, I have Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in action figure form.
Happy birthday.
There you go.
Happy birthday. Where's my chorus?
There you go.
Sang. Okay.
Well, Dr. King is here in action figure form, ladies and gentlemen. I want to give a special shout out to him for all his sacrifices and whatnot that he made in his life.
In his life, goodness.
And also special shout out to and happy Founders Day to all the women of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, founded at my alma mater, Howard University. My great grandmother was an AKA, and I think we have at least one AKA here on our BlackProGen panel this evening. Our fearless leader, Nika Smith.
Yes, spring 2000. I'll be 20 this year.
Oh,
I know. Yeah, I know. Can you believe it? And Bernice, of course, is a Sarah of mine. Hello, chat room. We've got a lot of people in the chat room. Darnisha Pickett, what's going on? Dale E. Colston, Tierra Cotton-Kello, Sasha Johnson, Trina B, Raymond Reeves, my cousin Mosi. What's up, Karen Royal? Hello, all of you guys. Shelby Cowan, Harold Motley, Tracy Monroe, people coming from all over Toledo, Baltimore, Dallas, Texas, Flint, Michigan. Someone's in Charlotte, but they're really from Arkansas. Lots of folks out there. Thanks so much for joining us. We've got a lot of content to get into. Before we get started, of course, we're going to post some links in the chat room where there are episodes that cross-pollinate with this one, meaning there's some content that we're going to talk about tonight that may be referenced in a previous episode. So True has got those links ready to go to post. In particular, we're talking about episode 76, Reconstruction and the Aftermath named Jim Crow. Episode 69, Biology of a Document from Analysis to Plan. Episode 52, Deconstructing the Freedmen's Bureau. Episode 3, Searching the Freedmen's Bureau. Episode 5, The African American Online Genealogy Toolbox. And last but not least, we've got a whole state-specific episodes playlist. So all of those episodes come into play when we're going to have the conversation that we're going to have tonight. I got my headphones on Amazon. Someone asked that in the chat room. They have a lot of colors in addition to pink. All right, so first question to lead off the conversation about the census, as True is putting those beautiful links inside of the chat room. What is a census? And why in the world do we take one? Why is a census happening this year?
I often start out some of my presentations pointing out that as much as we as genealogists use the census, it was not created for us. We get frustrated when we can't read something and we're like, wow, how do they expect us to know what's going on here? It's not created for us. It is a 10-year or once every 10-year count, a body count of the population to determine any particular state, region, territory, colony, what have you, what the number of representatives that particular state or domain should have in Congress. That is why a state might be smaller geographically, but have more senators, not more senators, but more Congress people in their particular state than a state that's spread out millions of square miles. And again, it's based on the number of people that will determine the number of representatives in Congress for that particular political domain.
That is 100% correct. Anyone else would like to chime in to what Ms. Angela is saying?
I guess I'll say one thing. I think it's important that we recognize the reasoning behind what Angela just said, right? Because oftentimes, as she said, people will get frustrated about that fact, but it's a fact of life. And so I think it's one of the things I really enjoy about being a genealogist is being able to take things that aren't really meant for one particular purpose and be able to reuse them accordingly. You know, it's kind of inconvenient at times, but it also is challenging and allows for creative thinking. And I think that a lot of times people get very robotic in our thought process, and hopefully people will begin to not do that. You know, if you're just starting out, you know, you got to think outside the box sometimes to get to the information that you really want.
Anyone else want to chime in on, what is a census? Why do we take one? Any thoughts? I mean, because she's absolutely correct. It was not created for us. As much as genealogists want to act like that is our document, we get real protective over the census. Have you guys noticed this? Like that's our document. We got to, and then we kind of put some of that ownership on our ancestors. Like, I've got to find them in this one. It's like, but it wasn't really made for y'all. Like,
Right.
it was made, like it was sort of made for y'all, but not. But we have this weird ownership thing over it. And I just want to go ahead and read a little bit of the law. True has got it to post in the chat room, so you guys can go ahead and follow along with it. It's Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution. It says, representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union, according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined, adding to the whole number of free persons. Notice that was separated out. Okay, we've got to keep that in mind. Free persons. Okay, including those bound to service for a term of years. So including indentured servants, right? So when people have that funky argument about, oh, well, my folks were slaves too and they were indentured servants, well, actually they were counted as a whole person with this. So, I mean, I'm going to start a whole bunch of online fights. I love that. Get your facts together, right? But this, we're talking, this is literally pulled from a government website, okay? So this is including those bound to service for a term of years, excluding Indians not taxed, 3/5 of all other persons. That means enslaved people. The actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting of Congress of the United States, and within every subsequent term of 10 years in such manner as they shall by law direct. The number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence Plantations 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. So that's directly from the law, okay? And there's a whole lengthy history regarding the census and the legislation, Congress having to actually enact an act to say, let's do the census, until the actual Census Bureau was created. And there's a separate link that True will also share in the chat room that will detail, year by year, even including links to the exact legislation that we're talking about that made it so that the census would happen. And so how do we access it? How do you get to the census? I mean, for some people watching the show, that might seem like a crazy question, but everybody is starting at the ground floor on this, right? You had to find the census at one point. Matter of fact, here's a random question. Explain to me the feeling that you had the first time you saw a name of someone you knew on the census. I'll start with Ms. Angela.
Actually, disbelief. And I think that especially when one is a new researcher, many of us begin with a sense of doubt. Doubt meaning they didn't really record us. They didn't go to our community and take down our data. And I remember the first time finding a document and really literally saying aloud, I gasped and just went, that's them. And I said it aloud, and it was total disbelief that I was actually looking at individuals who are part of my family. I came from these people whose names I was seeing, and there they were written over 100+ years ago. And I'm looking at this document, total disbelief. That was my first reaction, emotionally.
Ellen?
Pretty similar. I mean, for my mother's oral history, she didn't even have like maternal surnames for her parents. And that was something to see that on a 1910 census was pretty exciting. And if I remember correctly, I think I had to go to a family search center to do it. And I think also it was some of the earliest stuff that was posted online, available online. I mean, they didn't have all the stuff we had now. It was a big deal when 1910 was released, when that census came out. It was really, it's a confirmation and And then also for later ones, frustration when you can't find your family on there, but
Felicia?
I shed tears. I was excited because I saw my grandmother in the 1920 census as a 6-year-old little girl. And I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it now. It was, you grow up and you hear about this family member, that family member, but to see her as a 6-year-old girl and then to see her parents' names, who I never met because they were gone by the time I was born. It's amazing. For me, it lets me know that I existed prior to who I am today, that there was something in the past that was connected to me.
Alex?
I was just thinking about how when I started, sites like Ancestry was like hardly accessible if you didn't go to a library. You were like folks like me and like in the burbs, like tucked away from like all access to these things. The only thing that I really had was Family Search, and it was before the Family Search that we all know now. It was like that navy blue block.
Ooh, baby, talk about the navy blue block Family Search. Goodness gracious.
Y'all need to check this out for any people that like got started in the last 5 years. Y'all need to experience the navy blue block Family Search, okay?
Internet, way back machine.
Wayback Machine, yep. In the meantime, the only thing that they really had was the Social Security Death Index and the 1880 census. Because I, for the most part, on my maternal side, I knew my family members by name and by like enough information about them that were living during that census. I actually saw the 1880 census before I saw any of the censuses leading up to the most recent 1940. So it actually wasn't for a few years until like I finally saw the names of my actual grandparents and even great grandparents on that. But when I finally saw that index, all I saw was first and last names, birth dates, birthplaces, and birthplaces of mothers and fathers. And that was enough for me that like, it did something to me at that time. So that feeling that I got was like, wow, they exist. But when I finally saw that image and I saw those neighbors and I saw those occupations, that was a whole beast of a different name. So
True.
I think I was just overwhelmed. I mean, I was out in Fort Lewis at the time and in Seattle out there. And that's when I was like getting my like AOL disk for 30 days. And I would, like Alex say, I would just jump on and try to do, I had my first computer, it was a Gateway and we had it just fully loaded. So I think I was, I was just shocked. And I think I was just, just overwhelmed the fact that I'm real. Like I'm somebody, like, because all I could think about a lot of times is that when I keep going back to like my bad memories of when I'm in school and people are saying they're from the Mayflower or they have a Patriot or something. But when I would see their names all written down there and how old they were and they were born here and there, it just was like, I have somebody too. Like I'm true, you know what I'm saying? Because of them. Like, I mean, every time I would get a census, that feeling would come over me like, I got this. This is me. This is me. And that's the best way I can describe it is I like their names are on paper, but it's like a reflection. It's like looking back at myself and it's like, I'm real.
James?
I would say for me, it was a feeling of I guess like everybody said before is that there was something before me. I remember finding my maternal grandmother and her sister and their parents, and most of them I had met before, but I never met my great grandfather. And the idea of seeing them on paper being small children, but in my life I always knew them as these older women, right? It really kind of fascinated me about what their childhood was like, which is something I had really considered. And I want to go back to something that one of our chatters said, Elizabeth T. She said that she views the census as being a snapshot of a single day, right? I can find my maternal grandmother in the census. I have not been able to locate my maternal grandfather in the census at all, but I can find his parents. Now, he was about 1, maybe 2 years old at the time, if that. And it could just be a case of one day he was with one parent, the other day he was with another. I mean, who knows? But so again, it's very hard to think like that, because again, the census wasn't taken for genealogists or people in the future to really go back and look at it in the way that we are. And of course, my great grandparents, being teenagers, they weren't thinking, oh, let's make sure our son is stationary so that he can be in this one document, that somebody might look for 100 years from now. No, they weren't thinking like that. We have to remember that the people were still living their lives at the time the document was taken. It's not that my great grandfather wasn't alive; he definitely was, but he was an infant and probably was with one parent one day and another parent the other.
Well, you bring up great points, because that's the thing. We have to tell people how to access it, right? Most people that are going to look for the census now, they're going to find it where?
Online.
Exactly. They're going to find it online. Where when some of us started researching, it was microfilm and it was those Soundex cards and having to go to the Soundex card and, knowing what the Soundex code was. Remember when it was a big deal where you could put in the last name and it would give you the code? That was high technology back then. So bad. And then you'd have to go and get to the roll. But now you can do name searches, right? To get to people. Right. But remember, each website, whether it's Family Searchers, Ancestry, the indexes are different. So you may find the name index one way on Family Search and then different on Ancestry. So sometimes it's best to work in tandem. And then there are population schedules. Those are mostly what everybody's looking at, are population schedules. We also have the Special Census of Indians. Angela, can you talk briefly about that?
Sorry, I had to unmute myself there.
There we go.
There were census counts that were taken in the 1800s, mid 1800s, in Native communities, but not on a regular basis. It was not really until, and I'm speaking strictly of the federal census, I'm not talking about things that were done in specific communities unique to that one population, but in 1900, there became a more systematic effort to record Native people. And you find particularly 1900 and 1910, and I have found over 20 states actually use this census form where the Native population was actually captured. Now, it was captured in a community where there was known to be an Indian community. And of course, you do find, for example, people on Long Island in New York, you do find a Shinnecock population captured in 1870, but then they're captured differently in 1900 because there's some questions that are unique to Native people that are not found. Those questions are not found in the general census. Questions such as educational institution, I wish that was in the general population census, but it's not. Questions about marital status. Is this person living in polygamy? What kind of dwelling do they live in? In the 1900 census, this question was asked, does this Indian have any white blood? If so, what percentage? And by 1910, particularly as the population was more well defined and known to exist, well acknowledged, I'll put it that way, in Indian territory, you find the question asked what percentage of white, Indian, or Negro blood. And so you find in many cases triracial communities. In Charles City, Virginia, for example, you find some Chickahominy people who are there, and they're clearly triracial, and the same way in other communities throughout other states as well. Again, and this is apart from those unique records that are found by tribe in certain tribal communities.
Look at our resident expert just coming in and just giving you guys a nice little primer. But that's right. She's absolutely right. So population schedule census, U.S. Census, right? Even if it's a special one, like the Special Census of Indians that was specific nations in 1880, the tribal records are separate from these census, and they may include additional censuses or rolls like they do in the Cherokee Nation. There are several, and they're not in increments that are like, 1880, 1890, like they're kind of And it really all depends on what annuities and things were going forth at the time, right? That's a longer discussion. Watch the Friedman episode for more on that. And then there were non-population schedules, which included the agricultural, industry, social statistics. Those can be found on Ancestry and Family Search. And we'll be placing some links in the chat room for blank census forms. You need those because sometimes when you're looking at the actual enumeration, it's hard to read the headings at the top. And sometimes I like to get into the practice too, of just kind of writing down, like writing the people's names and information out. And in some ways, it's almost a good exercise to look at how what you actually found to support the census differs from what was actually reported on that particular census, right? Like if you found a birth date or something that didn't quite match up. Okay, so let's talk about what specifically is different about the census in 1870. Y'all should jump in so quick on this question.
Well, the biggest thing about it, which we don't want to take for granted, is that this is one of the earliest federal records that you can find where Black people in mass are being counted. I don't want to say what usually people say, but it's usually a big go-to because it's the first one where, following the Civil War. There are other types of records, that are maybe more local or what have you that you can check that go back before 1870, but 1870 usually is really a cornerstone, particularly for African American genealogy because of that fact.
And yeah, and I think all of us would agree that this is the first time where every African American is documented. That word really can't be used. Why?
Because not everybody was counted. And also the thing is that there's plenty of other sources and records that our people were counted on before 1870, even between that 1865 to 1870 little gap. Mm-hmm. There are records that are abound, be it on the county level or the Freedmen level or otherwise. You just have to be able to get to them and to have a good starting place.
Also, there were several thousand people who were west of the state of Arkansas who had been enslaved, who were no longer enslaved. However, they are not recorded in the federal census of 1870, 1880. And of course, they appear for the first time in the federal census in 1900. And I'm referring to those who had been enslaved by the 5 so-called civilized tribes, excuse me, meaning Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Muskogee Creek, and Seminole nations. And those individuals are not in the federal census of 1870. However, I do point out that 1870 is still significant because it does capture in states that bordered Indian Territory, Kansas, southern Kansas, Arkansas, western Arkansas, Louisiana, just slightly in that northwest corner, and of course, North Texas. Those states that touched the territory geographically, you will often find individuals living in those states who were captured, but they were born in the territory. And that is significant. Also, you also find individuals in southern Texas, near the Rio Grande, not far from Del Rio, Texas. You find a substantial amount of African ancestry people living in and around Fort Clark, Texas, Del Rio, Texas, Brackettville, in I believe it's Kinney County, and they were born in Mexico. And they had come back into the States after the Civil War had ended. Many became the males employed at Fort Clark and later became the Seminole Negro Indian Scouts between 1817 and 1914. Another story for another episode.
Which we talked about. I think we talked about in the Friedman episode, but we might not have.
I would suggest one other little trick for people when you're just bored and have nothing to do. If you have ancestors in any place, but particularly those states where slavery was most rampant, I'll use that word, do a geographic search, because 1870 and 1880 are the 2 census years, and 1870 being more than 1880, that you can find the largest number of individuals who were born in Africa. Play around with the database. Just
I'm glad you
type
said
in
that.
birthplace Africa, Mississippi, Arkansas, Louisiana, South
Yeah.
Carolina, Georgia. Play around with that database and study those people who were certainly born in another continent, who were still alive and lived to see freedom, and who ended up being enumerated in 1870.
Agree.
I
And
remember when
true.
you made us do that exercise because it stood out so clear as day, because I'll never forget about Easter Fegan in Alabama for me. I think it was maybe like about 10 people, but she was around Granddaddy Ike's father's age.
Wow.
So I remember when we did that, and I was like, I just didn't pay attention to that. And you made all of us go back and say, okay, y'all go back over here and look and see how many people from Africa, or, it was mainly Africa at the time when we were doing that. But now, that's always on my mind. Look over here to see, because we do know when our boy Skip did show that in the episode. I kind of watched that there the other night, about how he was a fourth generation, Mr. Sterling there. So,
Well,
yeah.
and I think it raises a larger point about, like, we always talk about community research. And if one of those people was living around your ancestor, don't discount and think that they had no influence or no ties to your family, right? Like, you still want to know, like, there probably was something in the newspaper when they passed away about where they lived, uncle whoever, right? Typically they will refer to elders like that as uncle blank, aunt so-and-so, oldest Negro, African dies, right? Use some of the search tactics we talked about in the newspapers episode, which we can potentially throw the link in the chat room. Sorry, for making your life a living hell.
Okay.
Alex, what would you like to say before we get into the changes from the 1860 census to the 1870 census?
Definitely a segue for that question. So in your original question, you asked us what was different about the 1870, and I wanted to just talk about some of the significances of the 1870 and 1880 census. To me, I always think of it, no matter what part of the states, continental states, us Black folk are from, or our folks are from, that census, or those two census really capture who survived to the family at that time, especially if they were if they were in a community where their family had been enslaved in this area for a while. Folks been separated, sold off, God galore. We see it in our DNA results. This is a story of who survived. And there was, like, when I first started researching, there was this regurgitated thing: look 10 pages back and 10 pages forward, and that's how you're going to find your former slave owner and other relatives. And there is some logic in that. I know who and why they created that myth. But in the meantime, that story, though, when you look at all of those households around, you start to see that collective origin of a lot of those people. Even if they aren't blood related, you start to see that community build out and start to form. And I think that there's some really good things that Auntie Angela was saying about looking and doing this activity about Africa. There's also that check mark of father or mother or foreign birth. So even if they may not have been from Africa themselves, maybe a parent was. So it's like, that's other things to consider, but then also thinking about what was considered foreign at that time also. Were your parents born in a territory, or Canada or Mexico, or so on and so forth? Or, like what I recently found out in my family, I have a direct ancestor that came from the Dominican Republic somewhere. I looked down and I saw my like 5 times great grandmother Oni had that box checked. I had never noticed that. Been studying her for 12 years. So all that being said, I was able to at least make some kind of connection. So y'all check that out. That's my little tangent of the night.
All right, well, tangentry. Let's move into changes, for 1870. Just a quick list, right? There's a resource we're going to provide you guys. I think it was the Marion County, Mississippi Genealogical Society. They put together a nice write-up on the changes between census records. So we'll give you guys that as a link in the chat room as a resource. So changes from 1870, there was a column added for a street number, a column added for house number, birthplace of mother and father. That technically this looks like this might be repeated because that doesn't show up until 1880. State relationship of each person to head of household, that's 1880. Looks like this list got a little jumbled because that's not right. Oh, you know what? I'm on the wrong page. Sorry. I started going through 1880, not 1870. I'm like, wait a minute, this does not sound right. My bad. I know these census records. Anyway, changes from 1860. First census that lists every person in an abode regardless of color. Remember, this is every person, right? Air quotes, okay? I have to always bring people back to my daddy lived. I have his DNA. He is not on the 1940 census, and neither is his sister. So when you tell me you can't find somebody in 1870, I always got to go back. You didn't find your daddy. I didn't find my daddy. So keep that in mind, right? Color was expanded to include Indian and Chinese. So that's the first time that was technically included in the census. Column for selecting if the parents were foreign born. We talked about that. Column for selecting if born within the census year. Cannot read/write are in separate columns, not together. Constitutional relation columns, meaning were you a male over the age of 21 and can you vote, or has your right to vote been prohibited in the state that you're in? Number of male citizens over 21, number of male citizens over age 21 whose right to vote was denied on grounds other than rebellion or other crime. Now, here are some noted observations that we made going through the enumerators instructions that we feel like everyone should kind of, pay attention to. The property column, right? This is something that a lot of people hang their hat on, right? Oh, my folks had $1,000 worth of personal estate on the 1870 census, so they had this much. Well, let's read what the enumerators or the instructions for the census taker were. Property, column 8, will contain the value of all real estate owned by the person enumerated without any deduction on account of mortgage. So if the person had a mortgage, you would not be able to tell that as a result of this document. That means that you would need to go locally to see if there's a mortgage book or a deed book that would document that mortgage, right? The other piece is within or whether within or without the census subdivision or county. The property is their property in sum, not just where they were enumerated on the census. That is very key information, especially if you have a slaveholder who lived to 1870 and they have a lot of land or they have a lot of, real estate or personal estate. The personal estate outside the state or outside that county where they are enumerated is included in that number. So don't think if it says 185,000 that it's just in, Wetumpka, Alabama. I'm just throwing that out. It could be elsewhere.
Wetumpka. I'm sorry, I'm just saying.
The value is full market value known or estimated. Personal estate column 9 is to be inclusive of all bonds, stocks, mortgages, notes, livestock, plate, jewels, or furniture, but exclusive of wearing apparel or clothes. So that personal estate could include all of those things. So most likely if your ancestor had one of those, it could have been a mortgage. Think about it, right? Let's not think, oh, they had a nice bureau, or they had, it was all in donkeys, or it was all in cattle. It could have been a mortgage because the mortgages were counted in this particular column, okay? No report will be made when the personal property is under $100. So just because your ancestor may not have had $1,000, if they didn't have anything that was over $100, they did not count it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that they were destitute and they didn't have anything, okay? Moving forward, column 16, 17, education. It will not do to assume that because a person can read, he can therefore write. Inquiries contained in columns 16 and 17 must be made separately. Very many persons who claim to be able to read, though they really do so in the most effective manner, will frankly admit that they cannot write. These inquiries will be asked of children under 10 years of age. So that means that children who were under 10 were asked this question, okay, or they should have been asked this question. In regard to all persons above that age, children or adults, male and female, the information will be obtained at school. It is not intended to include those whose education has been limited to Sunday or evening schools. So just because there's no marking for a child in that category or that column does not necessarily mean that they weren't educated, they weren't going to school. They didn't include Sunday or evening schools in this, which most likely affects adults. Alex.
If you really think about when we covered this in our Reconstruction episode, but if you think about the matter of education, early education for our people, it was often night and Sundays. So think about the fact that so many people would be left out of that. And you really will see, if you look at elite Black communities and their histories, insular elite Black communities, you'll see a big difference in that compared to other rural or recent formerly enslaved communities.
Absolutely. Hey, also one thing I think that needs to be looked at, and I'm not going to say I have the answer to this, but something I've always been curious about is researching ancestors who, at least as far as we know, were illiterate, right? Because they do pop up in different types of records, but then it's like, well, they're not. It's not like if a person's illiterate, truly, it's not like they're leaving a diary behind, right? And I don't know, maybe somewhere out there, I'm sure somebody's done some research on that or a book or something. But I think that's something that that at least for me, I know I need to do more work on. Maybe I have to do that.
Maybe that's your job
yeah,
because you didn't bring it up. Maybe.
Right.
What you think, Miss Angela? Is that James's job? Should James be doing that? Sorry, I keep unmuting her and she keeps muting herself. Okay, go, Angela.
Yes, that is your charge should you decide to accept it. And of course, the tape will self-destruct after you listen to it all. But no, I think it is something that you may want to consider undertaking. I know you're busy. We all are.
All right. So moving forward, another area, column 18, deaf and dumb, blind, insane, or idiotic. Great care will be taken in performing this work of enumeration, so as to at once to secure completeness and avoid giving offense. So they basically told you ask one time, ask up front. That's it. Total blindness and undoubted insanity are only intended with this in this inquiry. So if someone is marked in this column, it technically was supposed to be as a result of being totally blind or undoubted insanity. That's the only time that's supposed to have been checked. Deafness merely without the loss of speech is not to be reported. Okay. Now, moving forward, the fact of idiocy will be better determined by the common consent of the neighborhood than by attempting to apply any scientific measure to the weakness of the mind or will. So they went and took a poll of your neighbors and said, true? Is Felicia crazy?
I know, right?
And then
I feel like that. Yeah.
And then Felicia answered back, or if she had a moment, and if she laughed like that, they got to get through how many households, you guys? So they didn't really have time to say. It was just quick, right? So let's move forward to the 1870 census. These are things to keep in mind. Of course, the instructions we'll be putting those into the chat room so you can get access to those things. All right, so changes from 1870 to 1880, column for street number, column for house number. So if you're in a major metropolitan area and you have a street, you can pull up, you can potentially pull up those things. This is why I love the New Orleans Public Library with that street index where they tell you what the street names were and they change so you can actually figure out where stuff is now. Birthplace of mother and father was added in 1880. State relationship of each person to the head of household. We love that. Marital status, single, married, widowed / divorced. Occupation of each person listed. Unemployment, number of months unemployed. I don't know if enough people are paying attention to that column of whether or not somebody was unemployed. Temporary illness or disability on day of census taker visit. Raise your hand if you have anybody who was marked, you've seen it's marked with that on 1880. I'm the only person that has a disability. Somebody in my family had chills and fever on that day. You guys are not, oh, okay. I thought everybody had. Okay, well, maybe just my folks had the flu.
Which was it? I can't say that
Maybe
again.
I overlooked it.
Oh, do we need to pull
we may have overlooked them.
We may have overlooked it. Yes, I have a census where it says that someone had chills and fever on the day the census taker came in 1880. There's a whole column for that. Be sure to go back.
Picking somebody.
Yeah.
You got me want to go look.
Go look. It's there. Trust me. If born within the census year, give months in fraction format. Pauper or convict status is no longer on the census. That was an area that was removed. And so in terms of noted observations for the enumerators instructions in 1880, we noted that color had an interesting set of situations within that. Color, this is column 4. It must not be assumed that where nothing is written in this column, white is to be understood. Did you hear me, panel? Do I need to read that one
heard.
again? White is the
Well,
I done
default.
heard
They
and
didn't
seen.
they didn't hear you in the back. They didn't hear you in the
Oh, I
back,
need to
teacher.
make sure. Color on 1880, it must not be assumed that where nothing is written in this column. White is to be understood. White is the default. White
Wow.
is the Times New Roman 12 point.
Well,
Okay.
Mm.
The column is always to be filled. Be particularly careful when reporting the class mulatto. These are in the instructions. The word here is generic and includes quadroons, octoroons, and all persons having any perceptible trace of African blood. Important scientific results depend on the correct determination of this class in schedules 1 and 5. That's what they told you. Okay. So remember, mulatto was a lot. That was a blanket, right? Now, of course, we have to talk about the defective, dependent, and delinquent census because this was a special sort of feature, special schedules, Schedule 3 within the 1880 census. Anyone would like to, I mean, I have the objective and the instructions, but anybody kind of want to talk about that briefly? Is anyone besides me and True found someone on the DDD, as we call it, for the 1880 census? Any? Okay, Alex, okay, so what is the DDD, Alex?
So isn't it delinquent class is like the blanket statement that they use. I found two. So I found one juvenile who was listed as ward, and in the regular census was already listed as ward, but this kind of explains more. And then I've also found someone who was listed as deaf and dumb. Which was actually an aunt of mine that was sold away. So that's been my experience with them, and that was for the state of Alabama.
Mine was in Kansas. True, yours was in Pennsylvania.
Pennsylvania, my Patriot line. I think it was it my fourth or third? I think it was the fourth great grandmother there. But they used defective, dependent, and delinquent census, and even though they're on that 1880 census, they're still once again recorded. It's like they're recorded twice because they're on that special form there. I've researched this family in depth, but it just goes to show you how when you are accumulating paper, and I've seen that 1,000 times, but while we were doing prepping for this show, I noticed that in one of the columns, I think it was like 15 or 17, it said Philadelphia, and then there were numbers behind there. Now, I've been in DAR for 3 years, and I didn't even pay attention to that, even though that is one of the documents that I submitted. So what I'm saying is my family is from Newville. And if they're saying Philadelphia, that's a 2-hour ride. So why are my three, I guess they would be like great whatever aunts and uncles going that far away from home? Because like you said about how the numerator might be going in the community, I don't think my family was ostracized, but they were amongst themselves, but the community knew, and they're probably perhaps, I can only imagine that, they were the talk of the town every now and then, or if something come up, because, we've seen traces of, what happened with my family, because there was a lot of tragedy there, starting with that line. But I just wanted to go back and just say that, because I'm rambling now, but I've had those papers for a long time. And while we were prepping for this, I noticed that. So now I have to go back and find out in 1880, where in Philadelphia they were putting these children, the defective, dependent, and delinquent in a school there. It has to be that, because they're making telling you that they're getting schooling somewhere else. And I would have never really paid attention. It's taken me all this time to notice that they were away from Newville, Cumberland County. So
well, I think it would suit us to read the instructions for the defective, dependent, and delinquent census. Remember, if a person is documented in the regular 1880 census, they're going to be on a regular population schedule like you would find them on Ancestry. But if they are in the defective, dependent, and delinquent, that is a separate enumeration. And they could be enumerated there under that section in Schedule 3, and they could also be in the pauper or indigent census, which is also a part of sort of the DDD, which is in Schedule 7. They've been microfilmed or scanned together on Ancestry, and they're available there. So for Schedule 3, the object of this supplemental schedule is to furnish material not only for a complete enumeration of idiots, but for an account of their condition. It is important that every inquiry respecting each case be answered as fully as possible. Enumerators will, therefore, after making the proper entries upon population Schedule 1, right, that's the regular 1880 census, transfer the name with schedule and paper and number of every idiot found from schedule number 1 to the special schedule, and proceed to ask additional questions indicated in the headings of several columns. The word idiot has a special meaning, which it's essential for every enumerator to know. An idiot is a person with the development whose mental facility or faculties was arrested in infancy or childhood before becoming to maturity. It is sometimes difficult to distinguish between the stupidity, which results from idiocy, and that which is due to loss or deterioration of mental power in consequence of insanity. The latter is not true idiocy, but dementia or imbecility. They likened people having dementia to being imbeciles. This is what was going on at the time, okay? The enumeration desired for the census is of true idiots only. Demented persons should be classed with the insane, you guys. So if someone suffered from dementia, like now, if it's advanced, we may put them in a facility for people to help care for them. We don't consider them insane, but back then they considered them insane. So when you may potentially find someone on the DDD and they're marked insane, look at their age to see if it's actually dementia, or it may have been dementia, okay? Enumerators may obtain valuable hints as to the number of idiots in their residencies from physicians who practice medicine in their respective districts. So if your doctor thought you was crazy or you didn't have no sense, he could tell the enumerator and you could have been potentially put on this separate schedule. Just keep that in mind. Okay, in Schedule 7, in case any person enumerated in this special schedule is blind, deaf and dumb, insane, or idiotic, they have the same instructions as the previous one. The particulars of such case will be carried on such other special schedule as they may be. In addition to the enumeration of paupers required in this schedule, enumerators will also ask the keeper of every institution designed for the maintenance of the destitute the questions found below. This is at the very bottom of the page, which I know ain't nobody paying attention to because I didn't look at it until this week. The man where my family member was staying was getting paid $9 a week in 1880 by the county. To run a poorhouse. It was lucrative. Okay. And so they had to do a lot of tabulations as of May 31st of that year. So I've got some images. We kind of want to show what some of these look like because it's just sad because I mean, they literally go through and just ask the person, it's just like, when were you admitted? What was the type of sickness did you have? It's very, very detailed. And so don't neglect if you find someone on them, don't neglect looking at it, or someone potentially with a name that your ancestor may have. Don't neglect that. So let me go ahead and share that really quickly. Okay. So it's a little hard to see, but this is what this is the difference in what the census looks like versus a regular one. And this is the page for deaf mutes who are separated out from among people who are considered insane.
You see my family there? Yeah.
Hold on.
The Hopewell Township in Cumberland. Then you see the Philly over here, which I didn't pay attention to.
And these are two sisters here, right?
That's my grandmother and her two children. But I don't come through those two kids. I come through another one of her daughters.
Yes, Hopewell Township. And it says that they're partly, and then it says Philadelphia 6 years.
That threw
Philadelphia
me
5
off.
years,
Yeah.
Philadelphia 4 years, right there. So be sure to go through and vet and look at all this information that's there. So the other thing I wanted to talk about just briefly is don't ignore the social statistics census. Something that I found that I thought was really interesting is if you can only pull those up by county, but at the bottom of that, it talks about the periodicals that are available or the newspapers that are available. If you have no clue where to look for historical papers for your ancestral locations, pull up those social statistics that are available for your states. Why? Because they'll tell you the name of the local newspaper and how often it ran. And in that way, you have something to look for, right? If it was a county paper, it may not have the same name as the town that your ancestors lived in, or the little, township or little hut, whatever they lived, right? So look at that social statistics, look at that. It also lists the churches. And it lists schools, number of schools, right? So that's another thing to look at as well. And so we also will put a link in the chat room for the non-population schedules access, like we're talking about with, because some of these things like the agricultural census, I know is not available for every state online, like Mississippi. None of those are available online through Family Search or through Ancestry. You have to go through the state archives to get them. There's a link that the National Archives has where it tells you which state has which or who has each state's non-population schedules. You'll look at agriculture because they'll have the amount of acres that someone had, what they grew on the acres of land that they had, whether it was rented or not. All of those details would be included there, and they would support what you would find at the local level in terms of deeds and all that other stuff. So let's talk about enumerators really quick, because we sort of touched on this earlier. We have a love-hate relationship with them. It's always going to be that way because you're moderately cursing because they either, mark Kang as Kang or Chlora as Celoy, or, mark the age wrong. We sort of alluded to this earlier, talking about, like I talked about, my father wasn't found. There's been a historic precedent set for undercounts. In fact, I just saw an article today about the Asian and the Latino community because of them being scared of the immigration question not answering this census. Let's talk about undercounts and double counts for a second. Ellen, would you like to weigh in on that?
You mean in terms of the undercount now, or
just in general?
It's a really it's a significant problem. There's a really good reference. We have one of the references that we have is for the African American status and identity in a postbellum community, and that's a really interesting paper because they really talk about looking at how you can just get thrown off by numbers if you're just taking the information in the census literally and not realizing that there's actually a lot of people who are not filling it, who are not actually farmers themselves, for examples, but they're actually working as farmers. They may be listed as farmers, but it doesn't really reflect on farm ownership as in 1870. So that you can get different information by the way that you're viewing the census, and part of that is because of the shifts in ownership. I mean, what happens after Reconstruction? I'm sorry, I'm a little bit, a little bit off there, but it kind of goes with shorting people out of resources as well. And that's something that happens in with certain communities in certain areas where it's a decision somebody decides that it's not warranted, the help isn't warranted, and so you have like undercounts will do that, and that usually goes along with communities of people of color, so that adds another layer to the issues around immigration, around acceptance, around what is citizenship, and the census isn't technically citizenship anyway. The census really is just a recording literally of a flow of people in different areas,
I have seen in the 1870 census, for example, I use an example in one of my presentations coming out of Louisiana. And in that particular record, there was a Native American community. It is very clear just by looking at the document that the enumerator did not talk to the people being enumerated, because on that particular community around Lake Charles, Louisiana, and it clearly said these are Indians who live above Thompson's Bluff, who are hunters and gatherers. And then you get to a household. There was a man called Baptiste, and it says wife, one boy, one boy, one boy. No names. Clearly, he did not speak to Mr. Baptiste to find out the names of the children. This is 1870 census. Mm-hmm. And the next household, you saw the household, John Williams, and his wife, Lucy, and 5 girls. No names, just simply tick marks. One girl, one girl, one girl, one girl, and little tick marks there. Clearly, he probably just said, that's those Indians over there. Well, who lives there? Baptiste, he's got 3 or 4 boys, and the census taker reported that. That's John and Lucy, and they have all girls. He wrote that. He did not even interact with the individuals. So you can clearly see he just did an estimate on that particular page. Talk about an undercount again. Was there someone else in the house? Were there other children that Baptiste had? Because you know that person really didn't interact. You know that this population was undercounted.
Mm-hmm. Now most of our gripes are going to be about the wrong name, wrong gender, race, all that stuff being marked for ancestors. And because we can't go back, we don't have that nice X with the circle around it like we have on 1940, where you could tell who gave the information, allegedly, right? Because I've seen households where there is no X, which means who gave it? Like, I almost wish they had included a column that said his next door neighbor, or something like that, right? We don't even have that for that. Racial misenumerations are a huge problem. Ellen, can you talk about that briefly?
I'm sorry,
No, I'll just say it was talking about racial enumerations, right? Like how that has shifted over time, right? Because we talked about how Chinese and Indian weren't even on the census.
Right. So the categories do shift, and I'm not sure exactly what I can add right at this second.
I actually have something on that. When you, again, going back to what Elizabeth said earlier, these are snapshots of a day, right? I actually have a census record from, now this is going a little further than what we're talking about tonight, 1900 census, but it still applies. My great-great-grandmother, Fanny Weems Glover, which I have photos of her, she was very, 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 very pale skinned, okay? And in the 1900 census, her husband, and all of her children are listed as white. Here's the problem with that. We don't have a picture of her husband, Horatio Glover, but we know he was very dark. And all of their children were black as the ace of spades. But in the census for 1900, they're all listed as white. And it is my belief that chances are she was probably the only person that was home that day when they knocked on the door, because she had some chocolate children. Okay. Like chocolate. And I just laughed my behind off when I saw on the census. I'm like, my Aunt Betty, my Aunt Fannie Mae, okay? all my aunts in the 1900 census listed as being white, probably because their mother was probably the only one home that day, or she was the one that answered the door, and the person didn't do their due diligence to really, really investigate that.
Well, it's not only just that though. I mean, I have a cousin that's still living that was marked she's marked white on her marriage license.
Wow.
And the marriage happened in the 70s.
Wow.
And when I told her
that's my mom on her.
She cried. Cried like mad, cried laughing because she couldn't believe that she had never looked at her marriage license after all these years and noticed that she was marked white. Would that happen with your mom, Felicia?
Yeah, my mom on her birth certificate, it says she's blonde hair, blue eyes. Now she's very fair, very, very fair, or was very, very fair, but she grew into brown eyes and dark hair. But on her certificate, it's blonde hair, blue eyes. Now her mother was mixed, African American and Caucasian, but I don't know. And she had darker siblings, but whatever it was about her, there was blonde hair and blue eyes. And first, when my grandmother, because this is when people had their children at home and you had to report the birth within a certain amount of time. And that's what happened when she went to report the birth. They kind of looked at my grandmother and was like, "Are you sure this is your baby?" She was like, "Yeah, I'm pretty sure did this." But yeah, so it's crazy. Same with the census. Weird stuff.
Can you imagine what a census would look like if we saw a home with Meghan Markle and her mother?
I mean, really, that's a great example.
That's what the queen doesn't want.
Oh, Jesus. Ellen.
Just to add, you know, if you look at it, and people, if there's a couple of papers on this, if you look at the censuses in Puerto Rico, which is 1910, 1920 to 40, people are marked as anywhere negro, mulatto, whatever. And by 1940, these people are white. You know, and it happens partially because of the United States law, and then also just this gradual whitening of the population as people perceive it themselves.
You will have the same thing because because for one, sometimes it's self-identified. Of course, like you have populations of people. We still got Black folks on today talking
Right.
about how white they are, how non-Black they are. They're amongst us. But in the meantime, we also have to understand going from house to house and seeing it as it is. I have this really great photo. James just reminded me of my direct maternal ancestress and her several children by a multitude of baby daddies, 2 white men and 4 married Black men. And in the meantime, the way that they're all on this varying color spectrum, I have the 1910 census where he actually did write it as I would have wrote it, based on what I was seeing it, right? So keeping that in mind. Another thing, as far as like double counting, to go back to what Nika was saying before, was the idea of like finding someone in multiple cases. Sometimes the information may vary, but a good example that's a little more general is if you think of occupations. So domestics, oftentimes, which many people in both rural and urban areas would have participated in, many women especially, oftentimes they were live-in domestics and only went home to their families when they could. So in New Orleans in particular, like you'll see a lot of people that are living on St. Charles Avenue that are domestics, and they're listed in the census records with them. And then they're also listed, whoever like was the head of household or informant on the census of their actual residence would have included them in there or could have included them in there. So you'll see them twice. And where it's really special, if you do get that now, is that you might get some different information that may not have been included from elsewhere. So keeping that in mind too. Also thinking of Pullman porters or other railroad workers. In later censuses that we'll cover in this season, thinking of like oil, foundrymen, and so on and so forth. You'll see that they oftentimes can be listed multiple times. Also think of divorces and separations. That's a whole other thing.
We got a marriage show coming up next month to even highlight any of that stuff. Definitely you want to learn your enumerator. That's something that you, through this process, you want to learn, right? You want to be very familiar with their handwriting, you know, how they wrote, even potentially maybe even seek out how they were perceived in the community, right? If they were a leader amongst the folks of where you lived at, you know, kind of look around in the news to see how they were referred to and how they, you know, kind of how they move and shook, because that might tell you why they chose to document your family in a certain way. And remember, as we've been saying, this is just a snapshot. This is not an end all be all. So don't hang your hat on 1870, 1880, or any other census as that being the, you know, the final straw, and that you're not going to be able to get more. There's a laundry list of links that we put into the chat room up to and including analysis of the use of the U.S. federal census records and genealogical research. That was kind of one of our guiding things that we used for tonight. Measuring America, the decennial census from 1790 to 2000. That included all of the census enumerator instructions that we were talking about. Final question before we move into Ask Mariah for this evening. What are next steps after finding someone on the census? or in 1870, 1880. And I'll start with, most people get tunnel vision. They think because they found someone on 1880 and 1870, they don't have to research any other time before 1900. Whereas Alex alluded to earlier, 1865 to 1870 did happen, and 1881 to 1899 did happen. So those are a whole bunch of years that you have to account for research wise that are not, that are not tallied or not documented on these two records. What are the next steps would you guys suggest for folks?
I always say that for me, census records in general are kind of like bones for your family history research. They can form, a real core structure to it, but we all know the skeleton is not the only thing that makes your body what it is. So you have to put meat on the bones. You have to get some heart, get some lungs, get some veins, get some blood pumping in there. You need a brain, you need everything else on top of the skeletal structure. Okay. Dig into it, find out about, research the families around them, research these are all things we've talked about time and again. You have to put meat on those bones of those little lines on those census records to really flesh out who the people were and what their relationships are, not only to you, but also to each other, which is also just as important. Just because they live next to, I tell people all the time, just because somebody lived next to somebody doesn't mean they were friends. They might have been enemies. They could have been related. They could have been sleeping with each other. There's a whole lot of things that could have happened between those people, So fine. Look, honestly, and I'll be quiet. I have one direct ancestor who does appear in the 1870 census who never had children with his wife. And the whole time I'm trying to figure out how the heck did I get here? Come to find out, he was sleeping with his neighbor down the street, and that's where my bloodline comes from.
James, I'm gonna throw my whole cup of tea at you because you just
Did he spill it? He spilled it.
I wanted to holler so bad.
The tea done been spilled tonight.
Did I tell him Granddaddy Haley Stewart? Yes, I just did. I told him Granddaddy Haley Stewart.
Free your ancestors, baby, because he was a free man at night. He was going down and sleeping
with Grandma Cornetta Sneed.
Oh, not Cornetta.
Cornetta.
Wow.
See, ours was Claire Walker she had Rambo by Papa Sam, but we all know that now.
His name is Rambo. We've got a Cornetta and a Rambo. God is good tonight. Alex, what would you like to chime in before we get to viewer comments and ask Mariah?
So for me with the 1870 and 1880 census is twofold. So the first thing, after finding, the direct person that I'm looking for, really looking around, as James was saying, like you said, they could have been enemies and they also could have been sleeping with each other. I go and I tally up those last names, and I also look in that next 10 years before and after to see who some of those kids were researching, and that takes a lot of time. Who they were marrying, that takes a lot of time. But at the same time, go through and look through your DNA matches if you've tested, especially with Ancestry, and just see if any of those names are coming up in that area, or you can trace people back and then try to figure out, okay, well, if they're all clustered here, maybe I'm not finding a direct relationship to some of these people, but at least I see them and you'll have an idea. That's one end. And then the second end is getting outside of the census and looking at the people, some of those people with those property indicators that we talked about, that 100 to 200 often, looking at them and looking especially at larger white landowners in the area and locating where they are. It is much more than just that census record. Locating where they are on the map and looking and saying, okay, well, this is in Connecticut County, Alabama. Today it's called Lieffian Community. Let me look at what's popping in Lieffian Community today and see if I can piece together exactly where these folks would have been on that map to give you more context. Look at the cemetery around, look at the churches around, look at schools around, look to see how long they stayed in that area over the next 4 census years. See how that area changes. That's really, really key. If you want to go back, do the same thing, and almost the same things will apply. Look through those deed books, look through those wills, see if you can get that township range, whatever the case is. But
township range section.
Yes, all that.
Agree. And the only other thing I would add, and there was a question in the chat room that was asking about, what was I going to say? Inmates or people in jails, they will be marked as such. Remember, snapshot, right? This is today's selfie. When you go back in your phone and you look at your metadata, it's going to say that you took it on January 15th. Treat a census just like that, right? Treat it just like that. If somebody was incarcerated, there, you know, and records do exist. You can find them at the state level. Family Search may have them. I know in particular, our Mammies does a lot of research in Louisiana. The Louisiana penitentiary records are available on Family Search. They are browsable. You know, this is not going to be a scenario where you're going to be able to type in a name and have those indexed, at least not at this particular point in time. But in other, you know, states, also check that out as well, and go local and look at those criminal court records that are probably not microfilmed or haven't been digitized by anybody. And you can pull up the docket number, see what the charges were, and see what the sentence was for a particular person. Anything else before we move into Ask Mariah?
I'll have to find that link to that first episode we did one season where I gave an example about my uncle Prop. Remember Prof Ivory? He was Granddaddy Ike's son. And that's how I found out, because he was on that prisoner inmate schedule first. And then it led me to find out what was really going on behind the scenes. So I'll try and find that link to that episode and drop it in the chat room here.
All right, all right. Moving forward, let's share some viewer comments for tonight's episode. According to Dr. Shelley Murphy, census is one of the most incorrect documents in my opinion. I actually kind of agree with this. We do not know who provided the info and the misspellings for one day of time. That's very true. Michelle Mahler says, I was so excited to find my second great grandfather on the African American Civil War Memorial for the Union side while living in Rome, Georgia. That was her first memory of the census. And Regina Calloway, who we'll refer to as Khalifa, because she got a long username, she says, oh my God, it is also mentally demoralizing and inhumane. Exactly, talking about the DDD and the paupers Schedule 3, Schedule 7 in the 1880 census. Thank you guys so much for all of your comments. And now it's time for your girl, Ask Mariah. This is the part of the show where you, the viewers, submit your questions, queries, conundrums, and more to the panel, and we weigh in live with research help specifically geared towards you. Panelists never see the queries beforehand, so you get a chance to see us work together live to help our Genia buds get past their brick walls. Tonight's query is from Drumroll Panel. Tonight's query is from Katrina Young. Who are the parents of my second great grandmother, Lucy Youngblood, born about 1880? This is going to send off bells for Bernice, because Bernice has Youngbloods in her family. I can see her right now. I can see her right now. All right. Who are Katrina's third great grandparents, parents of Lucy Youngblood, born about 1880? What she's found, an 1899 marriage license for Henderson Brent and Lucy Youngblood. They were married in Pike County, Mississippi. And if you know anything about this area, I call it the L of Louisiana, hitting that southern part of Mississippi. If you have any ties to Wilkinson County, Pike County, Amite County in Mississippi, you probably have relatives living in Tangipahoa Parish, Louisiana, or East and West Feliciana Parish, Louisiana, or East Baton Rouge, St. Helena Parish. Literally, it's like a big, gigantic piece of mud in that area. So I'll put that out there. So she found a marriage license, Pike County, Mississippi, which is in the mud down there. That is how she discovered the maiden name, Youngblood. Other than that, other than their name, signature of the clerk, and Reverend J. Dillon, there is no additional information on the marriage record. The first record she has is 1880 Pike County census with Lucy living with her husband, Henderson, and child. She's listed as Sally. In 1910, Lucy is still in Pike County, but is listed as Dally. 1920, she is listed as Sally. And there's also a woman named Louise May Brent, born about 1850 in her household. So the panelists have some questions look on their face, because I believe they are questioning whether or not Lucy is the correct name. And if Sally was the actual name, and what proof that you have that her name wasn't actually Sally, or that we have the right people? Because for her to be listed on 2 different censuses with the name Sally and only one is Lucy, it may be 2 different women. But let's move forward because we got another slide full of information.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Alex. That's James. Sorry. What were
Oh,
you gonna say,
no. I was saying what you. I agree with everything you said. As an asterisk, I'm actually related to young bloods in Pike County, Alabama, and Louisa and I've had that discussion before. So I don't know if that may be total coincidence, but you never know.
It might be a quinkydink. So the census identifies Louise as the mother to Henderson. Remember, Louise is listed as Brent, right? Henderson is supposed to be a Brent as well. But Katrina is suspecting that it could be incorrect and that Louise could possibly be the mother of Lucy instead. She found Louise May in 1900 Pike County and is living next door to a Kezar Youngblood born about 1875. Katrina suspects that Kezar may be Louise's daughter, or might be Keziah. That might be a misspelling. We don't know. There's a Louisa Youngblood born about 1858 in 1880 Pike County census, living with grandparents Amos and Fanny Youngblood. In 1900, Louise has a son named Jesse, who she was able to track on a different census with the last name Youngblood, not Brent. Several DNA tests taken. So that's what we're working with tonight, y'all.
Well, my question will be, I'm not sure where she lives, but I want to know if she's gone local, and to really track these folks down to see if anybody knows anything or look at any local courthouses or anything of that nature. I'm not sure. Is she in the chat live tonight? No? Okay.
One thing that occurs to me, and I think we mentioned it earlier just in passing, talking about how we used to research individuals before the internet became to be what it is now, and the platforms that we use. Every once in a while, I encourage people, when you can't find someone in a time period when you know that they should be there in that community, this is where the old-fashioned Soundex is extremely useful. And I don't mean the Soundex search on a digital platform. I mean going to a library that has the old Soundex cards, because many people have no idea how the census is arranged. Many people have no idea or are not familiar with enumeration districts. And what I do encourage that one do a line by line search of the entire enumeration district, and if necessary, a line by line search of the entire county. It's extremely difficult to do on Ancestry or Family Search because we see an image flash in front of us, and we might click the page before or the page after, but we don't know that there's a huge book and you should literally scroll from page to page, or turn the page, so to speak. And I think that sometimes individuals are there, those name changes that we often talk about and don't realize how often surnames evolved into something else. Maybe a family chose a different identity by the time of the 1880 census. Something else could have happened. So sometimes when if you have been thorough meaning entire ED, enumeration district, and entire county, first name search, sometimes forget the last name and look for the given names and see what happens with that. Just a suggestion.
Alex?
One of the things that I was kind of course, that Sally to Lucy transition happened. So I wanted to see if they checked for another marriage from I believe Henderson to someone named Sally, because Mississippi is one of those hard places to find exact deaths. Like if you just work off online, finding an instant record about Lucy's death would potentially be a little harder. So that's something to consider, is like that remarriage. And then if you were to go through and look at that what was it, Louise May Brent, seeing as to how they were connected to this potential Sally person. So separating the identities of these two people. Also going back to the census issue, if you look on 1920 and 1910, you know, it does say how many times this person was married. And then I think at 1920 asking like at what age. So that'll kind of confirm that too, especially if you'll see like a 2 on top of marriage for Henderson. That'll really, really help that cause out, because I just don't see Lucy turning into Sally if you've had Lucy over a number of records from 1880 all the way to their marriage. And then I think she has 1900 listed as well. She ain't turning into Sally overnight.
Well, yeah, yes, turning into Sally overnight. Yeah, she's in the chat room. She said first thing she found her Lucy on was in 1900. It wasn't 1880. So to me, it sounds like, it's a potential that it's 2 different women that he's with. One named Sally, one named Lucy, and they're about the same age. She found the marriage license for the Lucy, but the Sally is documented on the census. That could be a situation where that happened. But I think some of this is definitely local research, and maybe not even so much family search online through the catalog research, as in get in the car or get on the airplane and go to Pike County. Bernice gave a great suggestion, and she said for her to check out the Youngblood Facebook page. She's going to find a lot of folks from Pike County. She also brought up, have you searched in St. Helena, Tangipahoa, and Livingston parishes? Remember, I talked about the mud. This is the mud area of Louisiana. If you have anybody who was in, talk about the foot. If you got anybody that's right here, you need to be going across the state line. Like, seriously, because you're going to have, if you have not identified relatives through paper trail, you are going to find them through DNA. It is inevitable. Please say, Alex, am I lying?
No, you're telling the honest guy truth. That it's just skipping over.
It's just skipping over. It's like, they knew the state line was arbitrary. So they just, they just did what they needed to do. Go ahead.
I would say another suggestion that I would look up as far as because I believe you don't have the slide up anymore, but I believe that she said she has her in 1880 with her first husband and their children. Is that what something said?
She said she made a mistake on that, because she said the first record she had her in was in 1900. It was not 1880.
So then, even better then, I would suggest looking in 1880 for that same area and just doing that ref search without the surname Youngblood, because she could have been married twice. She could have been married prior, and Youngblood could be her second name. So try to get that confirmation from like her children's death certificates or social security applications, whatever that could be listed on. But like literally looking up all the Lucys that could have fit that name in that area. It's time consuming, but it could be worth it. We didn't talk about during the episode portion of the show, the name changes between 1870 and 1880, as Angela was saying earlier. That happens so often. So just seeing if she had a parent born out of the state listed on one of the census records, seeing if you can find a Lucy with a parent in that state. So that's a tool that I would suggest.
Anything else to follow up? I think it's great. Bernice also mentioned, they crossed over for jobs, for school, to avoid being arrested. And here's the other thing, and this is for free, and I'm always going to say this: don't ever say you can't find anything in Mississippi until you have gone there. Let me say that again. Don't ever say that you can't find something in Mississippi unless you have gone there. Because if you've done any research there, you know how tightly they hold their records, and they don't let a lot of stuff get out, whether it's through microfilm with Family Search or whether it's being made available on Ancestry. So this definitely, to me, sounds like you need to venture there. Bernice also gave another great suggestion. I was just about to say this: educable children's records for Pike County. Great. Look for Youngblood parents in there. I would also look at Brent as well. Brent is one of those known surnames in the mud in those parishes and counties. I've seen Brents in my own DNA matches and Youngbloods as well. It's a soup. So is Felicia. So you're gonna have to kind of decipher. There may be 2 different Lucy Youngbloods. right? And you might have latched onto this one because it sounds familiar. There may be another person that actually may fit the bill a little bit better. And look at those, distinguishing characteristics: age, birth locations of parents. Is it consistent from one record to the next? Look for, if you can't find her on the census, look for the neighbors. See if the neighbors are on the previous one or the one after. Let's see. All right. I think that's it. We're going to move forward. Hopefully you found something, Katrina, or that you've gotten enough. She says, okay, it sounds like I need to make sure Lucy's the same person as Sally. Yes, you do. And Karen Royal also said, yep, I'm a Brent in 2 different ways. I'm telling y'all, it's a soup, baby. It is such a soup. I wish it wasn't, but that area is such a soup. It really is. All right. If you need help with your family history research, submit to BlackProGen Live's Ask Mariah for a chance to have experts weigh in to help you get past your genealogy research hurdles. A link to submit is in the description of each and every episode of the show. Remember to be super specific. Let us know what records you've searched, what oral history you have, if you've DNA tested, and more. The more you tell us, the better. You just may be selected to be featured on one of our upcoming episodes. Moving forward to announcements. Join me for the first ever Figure It Out Fridays, this Friday, January 17th, 9 a.m. Pacific, 10 p.m. Mountain, 11 Central, 12 p.m. Eastern. This is a new series of free webinars focused on taking what you learned during episodes of BlackProGen Live. Like tonight, we're talking about the 1870-1880 census and applying it in real life situations. Using a real family, learn how to glean and process information from the 1870 and 1880 census, how to pursue the leads they contain, and how to reconcile all of it to get a better picture of your ancestors in the latter part of the 19th century. Space is limited, so be sure to register today. True is putting the link in the chat room. And if you missed our first iteration of Crew Chat, I am sorry for you. We had a ball talking about the color purple on January 7th, but don't fret, we have another one coming up. Catch the next Crew Chat on, it's our hosted Twitter chat on Tuesday, January 21st at 8 p.m. Central, which will be all about the movie Soul Food, released in 1997 and starring Vanessa L. Williams, Vivica Fox, Nia Long, Mekhi Phifer, and more. For a full schedule of our Crew Chats, check the link in the chat room. These are our Twitter chats where we all meet up at a time, follow the hashtag, and you get to weigh in on questions. We're going to talk about a movie from a genealogical perspective. Who was there? Who was on the panel tonight? I think everybody was there who was on the panel tonight. We had really good fun. We had fun.
I mean, there were a lot of people there from our over in Canada, our friends over across the pond. Reese was out there. She's our new panelist. You all will get to meet her soon.
Yes. So. Yes. So don't forget, join us on January 21st. Also, don't miss History Unscripted, our new series. The first iteration features your favorite panelists and a guest, this time, author Annette King, discussing pop culture and current events from a genealogical perspective and family history perspective. Look out for History Unscripted, set to post Tuesday, January 28th, 2020, right here on the Who is Nika Smith YouTube channel. Remember, History Unscripted episodes are pre-recorded. They're not live, so don't be sitting there waiting like, wait a minute, where's everybody? They're pre-recorded, so don't do that. After that, we've got a Crew Chat on February 4th about, of course, what else but roots, because we're starting Black History Month. We're going to be talking all about the seminal TV series, so don't forget to check out your full schedule of Crew Chats with a link in the chat room. And then after that, we've got a busy Black History Month. This is only a couple things that are going on during Black History Month, because we got 7,000 things going on during Black History Month this year. For the next live episode, tune in on Wednesday. Did everybody hear me say Wednesday? We heard Wednesday, right? Okay, I just wanted to make sure. First few episodes are Wednesdays because it's basketball season and I'm not crazy. For our next live episode, tune in Wednesday, February 5th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Central, 9 p.m. Eastern for Breaking Ancestral Narratives Free. It's the beginning of our 2020 Black History Month series. Ever wanted to craft a narrative for your ancestors, but you weren't sure where to start? In this episode, we'll discuss how to use the facts you've gathered to create a narrative that can be used across all different types of media. Again, tune in live Wednesday, February 5th for episode 103. And of course, True will be putting a link for the full schedule for all 2020 episodes in the chat room. And we want to send an extra special shout out to our patrons who have gone above and beyond to support the content being generated for people of color, genealogy, and family history. Special thanks to Sir Williams, that girl in Kentucky named My True Roots, that lady in Florida named Ellen Fernandez Sacco, Marquita Fletcher, Shelby Cowan, Pamela Devana, Michelle Mahler, Kiera Cotton-Kello, Tammy Ozier, Lloyd Monroe, Edward Vinsang, Denise Muhammad, Sasha Johnson, Henriette Kang, that lady that's part-time Florida and South Carolina known as Tony Carrier, Tina Jones, Pat Richley, I think that lady's name is Dear Myrtle, and Betty King and Lorene Yalordi. Thank you so much for your support. And True, what you got to say to close us out for this evening?
I just want to say thank you to everybody for supporting us and coming out for 2020 season 6. And we will see you soon because we got 2 more things going here on the 21st and the 28th. And I got an admin meeting on the 27th. So I just want to thank all the panelists for coming out, Alex, James, Felicia, Ellen, and Miss Angela. And I'm just going to say good night and we'll see you soon.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
Live.
BlackProGen.
BlackProGen Live.
BlackProGen.
It's a place where evidence tells the stories.